In a quiet field in Brittany, a 300-ton granite giant lies shattered in the grass, its purpose lost to the Neolithic past. High in the Andes, stone blocks are cut with such precision they resemble modular parts from a modern industrial site. And in a remote Saudi oasis, a massive sandstone monolith stands cleanly split in two, as if divided by a single deliberate cut. Across the world, there are archaeological discoveries that do more than impress. They confuse. Some are so massive, so precisely shaped, or so unconventional that they seem to exceed the abilities of the civilizations we believe built them. These are not legends or speculation. They are real, measurable structures that have been studied for decades. Yet in many cases, the explanations for how they were carved, moved, or assembled remain incomplete. In this video, we are examining 7 of these unresolved mysteries. From temples carved directly out of mountains to colossal stones hidden inside ancient burial sites, we will break down what was built, what tools were supposedly used, and why the engineering still raises serious questions. And once you see the evidence laid out, it becomes clear why no explanation fully satisfies. So if that sounds interesting, settle in as we dive into these archaeological mysteries. And if you enjoy deep dives into ancient history and unresolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe. We release new videos every single week. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Our exploration begins on the windswept coast of Brittany, France, at a site that predates the pyramids of Giza and even the final phase of Stonehenge. Here, amidst the salt air and rolling green fields of Locmariaquer, lies the shattered remains of a monument that once dominated the Neolithic skyline. Known as the Grand Menhir Brisé, or the Great Broken Menhir, it consists of 4 massive fragments of granite resting in a line. When these pieces were a single, upright pillar, the stone stood over 20 meters tall, roughly the height of a 6-story building. The scale of this stone is difficult to wrap the head around when considering the era in which it was erected. Created around 4,700 BC, this single block of granite weighs an estimated 330 tons. To put that into perspective, it is heavier than 2 blue whales, or a fully loaded Boeing 747. The people who handled this stone lived in small tribal communities and worked with tools made of bone, wood, and harder varieties of stone. They had no access to metal pulleys, steel cables, or even the wheel. Yet they successfully quarried, transported, and raised this titan into a vertical position, where it likely served as a landmark visible for miles across the Morbihan Gulf. The history of the Great Menhir is not just a story of its construction, but of its deliberate destruction. For a long time, it was believed that a lightning strike or a powerful earthquake had toppled the monument. However, modern archaeological investigations, specifically those associated with the Locmariaquer project, suggest a more human cause. The evidence indicates that the stone was intentionally pulled down and broken just a few centuries after it was raised. It wasn't an act of random vandalism, but a systematic dismantling. The fragments were left where they fell, but other nearby menhirs from the same period were broken up and repurposed as massive capstones for local passage graves, such as the nearby Gavrini and Table des Marchands. This leads us to the primary mystery of Locmariaquer, the logistics of the journey. Geological analysis has confirmed that the granite used for the Great Menhir is not local to the immediate site. The stone was quarried from a rocky outcrop several kilometers away. This means that a Neolithic workforce had to drag a 330-ton mass across a landscape of uneven soil and marshes. Without the wheel, the most likely method would have involved a massive wooden sledge moving over a track of lubricated rollers. Calculations suggest that such a task would require a coordinated effort of several hundred, if not over 1,000, individuals working in perfect unison. The physical effort required to simply keep the stone moving is one thing, but the engineering required to raise it is another. To stand a 20-meter stone upright, the builders would have had to dig a deep foundation pit and use a complex system of levers and earthen ramps. As the stone was tilted upward, the weight bearing down on the pivot point would have been immense. A single mistake in the angle or the strength of the timber supports would have resulted in the stone snapping or crushing the workers below. The fact that they succeeded speaks to a level of practical geometry and physics that we are still trying to fully map out. Recent studies by the Locmariaquer project have provided more context by looking at what surrounded the Great Menhir. It was not a solitary monument, but the largest piece of a massive alignment of 19 menhirs that once stood in a line. Excavations have uncovered the empty sockets where these other stones once stood, revealing a monumental landscape that functioned as a ceremonial center for the region. The project utilized low-altitude photography and ground-penetrating radar to confirm that the entire site was designed with a specific astronomical or territorial alignment in mind. The mystery deepens when we ask why a society would invest such an unthinkable amount of labor into a monument only to tear it down a few generations later. Some archaeologists suggest a shift in religious or political power. As the era of the Great Standing Stones gave way to the era of the Passage Graves, the old monuments were essentially decommissioned. The Great Menhir was too large to be fully repurposed, so it was left as a broken relic of a previous age. The precision with which it was felled, aimed to fall in a specific direction, further supports the idea of a controlled, ritualistic dismantling. The remnants of the Great Menhir today provide a physical measure of Neolithic technical capability. They indicate that the logistics required to transport and erect massive stone weights were understood and utilized extremely early in human development. The site at Locmariaquer stands as evidence that large-scale engineering was already established nearly 7,000 years ago, functioning effectively with a toolkit limited to stone, wood, and bone. As we leave the fractured granite of France, we move from the open fields of the Neolithic to the crowded, ancient streets of the Middle East. Our next stop takes us beneath the modern surface of Jerusalem, where a single stone rests in the foundations of the Temple Mount. While it isn't as tall as the Great Menhir, its weight and the precision of its placement present a completely different kind of mechanical puzzle. As we investigate the megalithic feats of the past, it often feels like we are searching for a lost manual for civilization. I've recently found something that bridges that gap perfectly, and I wanted to share it with you. For the first time on this channel, I've decided to take on a sponsor, but I only agreed to this because it's a project called The Book that I've personally found fascinating and genuinely believe you'll love. The book is a massive 400-page illustrated encyclopedia that functions as a practical survival guide for rebuilding civilization from the ground up. It offers a step-by-step breakdown of humankind's greatest inventions, covering everything from food production and water purification to how ancient societies were built. What I love most is the unique aesthetic. The illustrations blend engineering drawings with a medieval art style that feels like it belongs in the ancient world we discuss every week. This was a massive 2023 bestseller that raised over $2.3 million on Kickstarter, and the quality is incredible, from the premium matte paper to the heavy hardcover. So whether you're a collector of rare history or looking for a gift for a curious friend, I think this is a brilliant piece of work. So if that sounds interesting, make sure to click the link in the description to grab your copy and use code UnchartedMysteries10 for 10% off at checkout. Now, back to the video. To understand the sheer scale of the next monolith on our list, we have to leave the open landscapes of Europe and descend into the torch-lit, subterranean corridors running alongside the foundations of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Deep within the Western Wall tunnel, far beneath the modern street level, sits a limestone block that remains one of the largest objects ever moved by human hands in the ancient Near East. This is the Western Stone, a gargantuan piece of masonry that has remained in its original position for over 2,000 years. The stone was placed during a period of massive architectural expansion in the late 1st century BC, an era when the city was being transformed into one of the most monumental urban centers in the Roman world. While many of the blocks in the retaining wall are impressive, the western stone belongs to a specific layer known as the master course. This was a single horizontal row of enormous blocks designed to act as a structural anchor. By placing these massive weights at a specific height in the wall, the engineers created a dense center of gravity that countered the immense lateral pressure of the earth and debris being filled in behind the structure. The dimensions of the western stone are staggering when encountered in person. It measures roughly 13.5 meters in length and over 3 meters in height, with a depth that extends nearly 4 meters into the wall. Modern geological estimates place its weight at approximately 517 metric tons. For perspective, this single block is heavier than 2 fully loaded Boeing 747s. It is difficult to overstate the logistical challenge this represented for a pre-industrial society, as the stone had to be quarried, transported, and positioned with a margin of error that left almost no room for correction. The engineering of the stone is defined by a technique called dry stacking. No mortar, cement, or adhesive of any kind was used to bind the western stone to its neighbors. Instead, the builders relied on a combination of sheer weight and a specialized carving style known as the Herodian header. Each block in this course features a finely drafted recessed border that frames a slightly protruding, flat central face. This wasn't purely a decorative choice. The perfectly square edges allowed the stones to sit flush against each other with such accuracy that the joints are often thinner than a human hair. Over time, the weight of the stones above has essentially pressed these blocks together into a single, unified structural mass. Moving a 500-ton mass through the steep and narrow terrain of ancient Jerusalem required a level of physics that researchers are still trying to map. The limestone was sourced from a quarry located several hundred meters away, but the path from the quarry to the wall involved navigating the Tyropoeon Valley. This was not a flat or direct route. The laborers would have had to guide the stone across a landscape of varying elevations, where any loss of control on a downward slope would have resulted in the stone becoming an unstoppable force. The primary theory involves the use of massive wooden sleds moving over a track of lubricated rollers. But even this method requires an immense level of synchronization from hundreds of workers simultaneously. Within the confines of the valley, traditional methods like massive earthen ramps are the most likely explanation for how the stone reached its final height. By building a gradual incline made of packed soil, workers could essentially slide the stone into its slot in the master course. However, once the stone reached the wall, the final set was the most delicate part of the operation. To lower a 500-ton block into a precision-cut foundation with millimeter accuracy suggests the use of sophisticated sandbox lowering techniques. By resting the stone on a bed of sand and slowly draining the sand through small holes, the engineers could have lowered the monolith into place with extreme control, ensuring the joints remained tight. Ancient writers such as Flavius Josephus recorded that thousands of skilled laborers and priests were employed specifically for their masonry skills during this project. Josephus described the foundation stones as being so massive that they appeared to be part of the natural bedrock itself, rather than something placed by man. This perception was intentional. The goal was to create a structure that looked and functioned as a permanent fixture of the earth. The fact that the Western stone has survived multiple sieges, massive fires, and powerful earthquakes without shifting a fraction of an inch shows that their calculations regarding mass and friction were fundamentally sound. The choice of limestone for this project was also a strategic one. While harder stones like granite might have been more durable in a different environment, the local limestone was easier to carve precisely while still being strong enough to support the millions of tons of pressure from the structures above. As the stone aged, it underwent a process of natural hardening, making the wall even more resilient over the centuries. The precision required to maintain the level of the master course across the entire length of the wall is one of the most significant engineering feats of the Roman era, as any slight tilt at the base would have resulted in a catastrophic lean at the top of the wall. As we look at the sheer density of the Western Wall foundation today, we are seeing the results of a culture that prioritized technical permanence above all else. The Western stone was a necessary solution to a massive geographical problem: how to hold back a mountain of earth while building a platform that could support the weight of thousands of people. It remains exactly where it was placed 2,000 years ago, held in its slot by the same physics that the original builders used to get it there. While the engineers in Jerusalem used massive weights to build a wall upward, our next stop takes us to a culture that took the opposite approach. Instead of moving stones to a site, they moved the earth away from the stone, carving a world-class architectural wonder out of a single, solid mountain. For this mystery, we travel east to the Aurangabad district of Maharashtra, India. Here, the landscape is defined by the Sahyadri Hills, a range of ancient volcanic mountains composed of solid basalt. While many civilizations throughout history have used stone as a medium for construction, the creators of the Ellora caves approached the mountain with a different philosophy. Instead of gathering materials to assemble a structure, they looked at a basalt cliffside and decided to remove everything that was not a temple. The result is the Kailasa temple, the largest monolithic structure in the world, carved from a single, continuous piece of rock. The project was commissioned in the 8th century by King Krishna, the first of the Rashtrakuta dynasty. According to local legend, the king fell dangerously ill, and his queen prayed for his recovery, vowing to build a temple and fast until she could see its shikara, or roof finial. To fulfill this vow quickly, the architects proposed a radical method. They would start at the very top of the mountain and carve downward. This allowed the queen to see the summit of the temple within days, rather than waiting years for a traditional building to rise from the ground. While the legend adds a layer of cultural color, the physical reality of the site confirms that the top-down method was indeed the strategy used for this massive undertaking. The sheer scale of the excavation is difficult to visualize without looking at the volume of material displaced. Builders had to cut 3 deep trenches into the basalt cliff to isolate a massive rectangular block of stone. From this central block, they began the painstaking process of carving out the intricate details of the temple complex. It is estimated that over 200,000 tons of volcanic rock were removed to create the courtyards, the central shrine, and the surrounding galleries. Unlike a traditional building where a mistake can be corrected by replacing a block, every cut made at Kailasa was permanent. There was no room for error as the entire complex is part of the original mountain. The engineering logic required for vertical excavation is fundamentally different from standard architecture. Because the work progressed from the top toward the base, the builders had to have a complete, 3-dimensional map of the finished temple in their minds before the first strike of a chisel. They had to account for the structural integrity of the basalt as they went deeper, ensuring that the massive weight of the upper stories and the heavy stone roof remained supported by columns that were being carved out of the lower levels. They were essentially engineering the support system, while simultaneously creating the decorative elements, all while working in a confined space within the heart of the cliff. One of the most significant mysteries surrounding the Kailasa temple is the timeline of its construction. Historical records and the sheer complexity of the carvings suggest that the main structure was completed in approximately 18 to 20 years. This timeline has puzzled modern engineers and archaeologists alike. If we calculate the amount of stone removed over that period, it would mean that the workers were extracting roughly 60 tons of rock every single day, working around the clock. This pace involves not just the carving itself, but the logistical challenge of moving that much debris out of the trenches and away from the site, using only manual labor and basic tools. Even with modern machinery and power tools, duplicating the precision and speed of the Kailasa excavation would be a formidable task. The basalt rock is notoriously hard and brittle, requiring constant sharpening of iron chisels. Furthermore, the temple is not a hollow shell. It is filled with life-size sculptures of elephants, intricate friezes depicting ancient epics, and complex drainage systems that are all part of the monolithic stone. The builders even carved internal bridges that connect different parts of the temple complex, all without the use of scaffolding, as they simply used the uncarved rock beneath them as a natural platform as they worked their way down. The structural precision extends to the interior of the temple as well. To create the inner sanctum and the various halls, the masons had to tunnel into the center of the isolated stone block. They managed to maintain perfect symmetry and floor levels across vast distances, all while working by the light of oil lamps or reflected sunlight. They also had to plan for the monsoon season, carving a sophisticated network of rainwater channels and storage tanks into the rock to prevent the temple courtyards from flooding. These systems still function today, 1,000 years after they were first conceived. As you move through the lower levels of the complex, the scale of the labor becomes even more apparent. The base of the temple is surrounded by a series of colossal elephants and lions, each one carved directly from the floor of the excavation. These figures appear to be holding up the entire weight of the temple, a visual representation of the strength required to maintain such a structure. The fact that these sculptures have survived centuries of exposure to the elements without significant structural failure speaks to the builder's deep understanding of the natural grain and strength of the basalt. The logistical mystery is further deepened by the lack of waste material in the immediate vicinity. When you remove 200,000 tons of rock, it creates a massive geographical footprint. Yet, there are no significant mounds of basalt chips or rubble found nearby. This has led to various theories about how the debris was repurposed or moved. Some researchers suggest the waste was used to build roads or foundations for other structures in the region, but the sheer volume would have required a transportation network as efficient as the carving process itself. The Kailasa temple stands as a unique example of what can be achieved when a civilization chooses to work with the landscape rather than against it. It is a monument that blurs the line between architecture and sculpture. Every pillar, every staircase, and every ornate ceiling was once part of the same mountain peak. The builders didn't just construct a temple, they revealed it by stripping away the exterior layers of the cliffside. While the masons at Ellora were focused on excavating inward and downward to find their monument, our next stop takes us to a different part of Asia, where the relationship between stone and the earth takes on a more enigmatic form. In Japan, we find massive stone structures that were not carved out of mountains, but were instead placed within carefully engineered burial mounds, some of which are shaped in ways that are only fully visible from the sky. In the heart of the Japanese archipelago, the landscape is defined by thousands of massive earthworks known as Kofun. These monumental burial mounds, constructed between the 3rd and 7th centuries, represent an era of immense social organization and engineering capability. The most recognizable of these structures are the keyhole-shaped mounds, or Zenpoko-en-fun, which feature a circular burial chamber at one end and a broad trapezoidal front at the other. From the ground, they appear as forested hills, but from the air, their geometric precision becomes clear, revealing a culture obsessed with symmetrical design on a massive scale. To build a monument like the Daisen Kofun in Sakai, which stretches nearly 500 meters in length, ancient engineers had to coordinate a workforce capable of moving an estimated 2.7 million cubic meters of earth. This was a systematic process where soil was excavated from the surrounding plains and stacked in alternating layers of clay and gravel to ensure the structure remained stable against the region's heavy seasonal rains. This period marked the emergence of the first unified Japanese state, and the scale of these tombs served as a physical manifestation of that new, centralized power. Historical records from the Nihon Shoki, an 8th century chronicle, describe how thousands of workers were conscripted from across the provinces to labor on these imperial projects. By bringing disparate groups together for a single, massive engineering goal, the central government established a unified bureaucracy through the very act of construction. To prevent these massive earthworks from washing away, the entire surface of the mound was typically covered in millions of fukiishi, or paving stones. These stones were gathered from nearby riverbeds and carried to the site to create a protective stone skin over the soil. Specific sites like the Goshikizuka Kofun in Kobe offer a rare look at what these mounds originally looked like before they were covered in trees. This site has been meticulously restored with over 2 million fukiishi stones, revealing the stark, white stone appearance that would have made these mounds visible for miles across the landscape. While the earthworks themselves are massive, the internal megalithic mystery is found within the core of these mounds. To protect the deceased and their possessions, builders constructed burial chambers using enormous blocks of granite and tuff. One of the most striking examples is the Ishibutai Kofun in Asuka, where the earthen mound has eroded away over centuries to expose a stone chamber composed of 30 individual blocks. The largest of these stones, which serves as the ceiling, weighs approximately 77 tons. Transporting and positioning a block of this weight within the cramped, subterranean confines of a tomb required a sophisticated mastery of levers and wooden rollers. The engineers had to calculate the load-bearing capacity of the vertical wall stones to ensure they wouldn't buckle under the pressure of the ceiling slabs and the thousands of tons of earth piled on top. Along the terraces of these mounds, thousands of terracotta cylinders and sculptures, known as haniwa, were arranged in rows. These figures, ranging from simple shapes to detailed warriors, horses, and houses, served a dual purpose. While they acted as ritual boundaries, they also provided a practical engineering benefit. By being partially buried in rows along the edges of the terraces, the cylindrical haniwa acted as small retaining stakes that helped to further stabilize the soil. Recent excavations at the Kondo Maruyama site have uncovered the remains of the specialized workshops where these haniwa were fired. These industrial-scale kilns prove that the construction of a kofun was supported by a massive supply chain, producing tens of thousands of terracotta pieces that had to be transported across the region. The precision of the kofun geometry presents an enduring mystery, as the perfect keyhole shape is only truly discernible from a significant height. This suggests the builders utilized advanced surveying techniques to maintain the correct proportions over hundreds of meters of uneven ground. Furthermore, the management of water was a constant concern. Most large kofun are encircled by expansive moats that required an intricate network of rock-cut channels and sluice gates. These systems were designed to keep the water level constant, preventing the moats from overflowing during the rainy season or drying out and compromising the weight distribution of the mound's base. Recent archaeology has significantly changed our understanding of how these sites were integrated into the ancient landscape. Using LiDAR mapping across the Mozu Furuichi Kofun group, researchers have been able to see through the dense forest canopy that now covers these tombs. These high-resolution scans have uncovered smaller, previously hidden mounds and secondary structures that were once part of a larger coordinated urban plan. The LiDAR data shows that the keyhole shapes were aligned with mathematical precision to both the cardinal directions and specific geological features in the distance. This technology reveals a landscape that was once a meticulously planned map of stone and earth, where every mound was positioned according to a strict geometric logic. Another significant location is the Tsukuriyama Kofun in Okayama, which remains one of the largest mounds in Japan that visitors are still permitted to climb. Unlike the Imperial Daisen Kofun, which is strictly protected as a royal sanctuary, Tsukuriyama allows researchers to examine the physical layering of the earth and the specific placement of haniwa fragments in their original context. The coordination required to manage the moats, the kilns, and the stone hauling crews suggests a society with a deep understanding of civil engineering and resource management. The Kofun remain as the earliest evidence of the region's ability to organize labor and material on an industrial scale, leaving behind landmarks that have survived the shift from ancient kingdoms to the modern world. Leaving the island nation of Japan behind, we cross the sea to the Korean peninsula, a region that holds one of the most concentrated collections of megaliths on the planet. While many are familiar with the stone circles of Europe or the pyramids of Egypt, few realize that South Korea is home to over 40% of all the world's dolmens. In the regions of Gochang, Hwasun, and Gangwon, thousands of these stone monuments dominate the landscape. A dolmen, in its most basic form, is a prehistoric stone table, a massive capstone balanced atop smaller upright support stones. However, the sheer density and scale of these structures in Korea present a mystery of social organization that is still being unraveled. These monuments were constructed primarily during the Bronze Age, roughly between 1000 and 300 BC. In Gochang alone, archaeologists have documented over 400 dolmens spread across a relatively small area. The sizes of these capstones vary significantly, but some are truly gargantuan. The largest among them is estimated to weigh over 200 tons. To put that in perspective, a tribal society living nearly 3,000 years ago managed to quarry, transport, and elevate a stone equivalent to the weight of a dozen school buses, all to mark a single burial site. According to UNESCO World Heritage Studies, these structures generally fall into two distinct architectural categories: the northern style and the southern style. The northern style dolmens, often found in Gangwon, are the classic table structures. They consist of large, flat capstones resting on tall vertical slabs, creating an above-ground stone chamber that looks like a primitive house. The southern style dolmens, frequently seen in Gochang and Hwasun, take a different approach. These often feature a much thicker, heavier capstone that rests on low, stubby support stones, or sometimes directly on top of a stone-lined burial pit, hidden beneath the earth. The engineering process for these monuments required a methodical approach to managing gravity. To place a 200-ton capstone on top of support pillars, Bronze Age laborers likely utilized a combination of earthen ramps and wooden rollers. Once the upright support stones were firmly set into a foundation trench, workers would build a massive slope of tightly packed soil leading up to the top of the pillars. The capstone would then be dragged up this ramp using thick ropes made of vines or hemp. Once the stone was positioned, the soil ramp was removed, leaving the massive capstone seemingly suspended in the air. What makes the Korean dolmen fields unique is the evidence of a quarry-to-monument pipeline. In the hills surrounding the Gochang sites, researchers have found the actual quarry beds where these stones were extracted. The process involved identifying natural fissures in the rock and using wooden wedges soaked in water to expand the cracks until a slab broke free. Because the quarries are located at a higher elevation than the burial sites, the builders had to navigate these massive weights down steep hillsides. This required an incredible degree of coordination to prevent the stone from sliding out of control, a task that would have demanded the participation of nearly every able-bodied person in the local community. The sheer number of these sites suggests that dolmen construction was not a rare event, reserved only for high kings, but a widespread cultural practice. In Hwasun, the dolmens are found along a 10-kilometer stretch of valley, interspersed with the very stone workshops where they were shaped. This suggests that the landscape was essentially a massive construction zone for centuries. Archaeologists have found that different dolmens contain different grave goods, ranging from polished stone daggers to bronze mirrors and greenstone ornaments. This indicates that while the monuments were communal efforts, they served to distinguish the status of individuals within a complex social hierarchy. The mystery of the Korean dolmens lies in the coordination required for such a high volume of work. During the Bronze Age, Korea was not a unified empire, but a collection of decentralized tribal chiefdoms. Moving a 200-ton stone is not something a single family can achieve. It requires a workforce of hundreds. The fact that thousands of these stones were moved across the peninsula suggests that these supposedly simple tribes had developed a highly sophisticated system of inter-village cooperation and food surplus management to support laborers who weren't out in the fields. Furthermore, the placement of the dolmens often follows the natural contours of the mountain ridges or the flow of the rivers. This indicates a deep understanding of surveying and site selection. In Gangwa, the Buganri dolmen stands in an open plain, its massive northern-style frame visible from a great distance. Its placement seems designed to claim the territory, serving as a permanent marker of a group's ancestral roots in that specific valley. The logistics of balancing such a large slab on relatively narrow support stones also shows an understanding of weight distribution. If the pillars were not perfectly level, the capstone would eventually slide or crush the chamber beneath it. As we look at the thousands of stone tables scattered across the Korean hills, we see the results of a society that spent generations perfecting the art of moving the earth. The dolmens are a physical record of a period when human communities began to organize on a scale that moved beyond simple survival. They were building for the future, creating markers that have survived the transition into the modern age with their structural integrity largely intact. Our journey through the world of monoliths now takes us from the communal burial fields of Korea to a much harsher, more isolated environment. We travel to the Arabian Peninsula, where we find a single, massive stone that has been shaped not by an entire society, but perhaps by a single, inexplicable event. Here, the mystery isn't about how many stones were moved, but about how one stone was perfectly divided. Sunlight crests over the dunes of the Tema Oasis in northwestern Saudi Arabia, striking a formation that seems to challenge the very physics of the desert. Emerging from the sand is a massive sandstone boulder, 6 meters high and 9 meters wide, standing as a singular landmark in an otherwise desolate expanse. From a distance, it appears to be a typical desert outcrop, but as you approach, a staggering feature comes into view. The rock is divided into two distinct halves by a vertical gap so straight and so clean that it looks like the result of a modern precision tool. This is the Naslaa Monolith, an anomaly that has become one of the most photographed and debated geological features in the world. The first thing that strikes any observer is the sheer uniformity of the split. The gap is only a few centimeters wide, and it maintains a near-perfect verticality from the top of the stone down to the very base. There is no shattering, no jagged edges, and no sign of the blunt force trauma one might expect from a natural rockfall. Instead, the two faces of the split are flat and smooth. Even more perplexing is how the two halves remain standing. Each massive section of the rock is balanced on a tiny, narrowed pedestal of stone, giving the impression that the monolith is hovering just inches above the desert floor. While the split often dominates the conversation, the surface of the rock holds a historical record that dates back millennia. On the face of the right-hand block, there are several well-preserved petroglyphs, including an elegantly carved horse and a human figure. These carvings are estimated to be around 4,000 years old, indicating that the oasis was a significant site for ancient nomadic tribes and early settlers. The presence of this art confirms that the monolith has looked much like it does today for thousands of years, serving as a canvas for the people who once navigated the trade routes of the Arabian Peninsula. When scientists look at Naslaa, the primary explanation for the split involves a process known as frost weathering. In this scenario, a small amount of water finds its way into a pre-existing microfracture in the sandstone. When the desert temperature drops at night, that water freezes and expands, exerting immense pressure on the surrounding rock. Over countless cycles of freezing and thawing, the crack gradually widens and deepens. Eventually, the structural tension reaches a breaking point, and the rock splits along a natural plane of weakness. Because sandstone is a sedimentary rock with distinct layers, it is physically capable of shearing in a very straight line if the internal pressure is applied evenly. Wind erosion also plays a significant role in the monolith's current appearance. The desert floor is a high-energy environment where wind-blown sand acts like a natural sandpaper. This process, called saltation, is most intense near the ground, where the heaviest sand grains are bounced along by the wind. Over thousands of years, this abrasive force has eaten away at the base of the monolith, carving out the narrow pedestals that support the much larger mass above. This creates the mushroom rock effect seen in many other parts of the world, though rarely with the added complexity of a perfectly bisected top. Despite these geological explanations, some researchers and observers suggest a more human-centered theory. They point to the extreme precision of the cut and wonder if ancient masons might have utilized primitive stone saws or even copper wires coated in abrasive sand to finish what nature started. In this view, a natural crack may have already existed, and ancient inhabitants, viewing the stone as a sacred or significant marker, refined the split to enhance its visual impact. While we have evidence of ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures using abrasive cutting techniques for smaller stones, applying such a method to a boulder of this size in the middle of a desert would represent a massive investment of labor. The mystery is compounded by the lack of tectonic activity in the immediate region that would typically be responsible for such a clean fault line. Usually, when a rock splits due to ground movement, there is some degree of lateral shift, where one side moves slightly forward or backward compared to the other. At Naslaa, however, the two halves are perfectly aligned. If you were to push the two pieces back together, the grain of the sandstone and the edges of the petroglyphs would match up with almost no displacement. This suggests that whatever caused the split happened with incredible stability, allowing the rock to divide without toppling or shifting. The Tema Oasis itself provides context for why such a monument would be significant. Historically, Tema was a vital stop on the incense route, a network of land and sea trading paths that linked the Mediterranean world with eastern and southern sources of incense, spices, and silk. It was even the residence of the Babylonian king Nabonidus for a decade in the 6th century BC. A culture capable of hosting a displaced king and managing complex trade logistics would certainly have the curiosity and the tools to interact with a geological landmark like Naslaa. The balance of the stone is a masterclass in natural equilibrium. If the pedestals were to weather away by just a few more inches, the center of gravity for each block would likely shift, causing the entire formation to collapse. For now, the monolith remains in a state of arrested decay. The sandstone is hard enough to resist the wind for centuries at a time, but soft enough to be shaped by the very elements that will eventually destroy it. Whether the Naslaa Monolith is a pure fluke of geological forces or a collaborative effort between nature and ancient hands, it serves as a reminder of how much we are still learning about the behavior of stone over vast periods of time. It stands as a silent sentinel in the Saudi desert, a perfect vertical line drawn in a landscape of shifting curves. As we leave the sands of Arabia, we travel to the high altiplano of the Andes. Our final stop takes us to a site where the mystery of precision moves from a single split in a rock to a complex, modular city of stone. Here, the engineering isn't just about a clean cut, it's about a level of geometric accuracy that appears to belong to a different age entirely. High on the Bolivian altiplano, where the air is thin and the horizon is dominated by the stark peaks of the Andes, lies a field of scattered stone that looks like a shattered puzzle of the gods. At over 12,000 feet above sea level, the ruins of Pumapunku sit within the larger Tiwanaku complex, presenting a landscape of gray andesite and red sandstone. Unlike the rounded organic megaliths of Europe or the massive singular blocks of Egypt, Pumapunku is defined by sharp lines, right angles, and a level of geometric complexity that suggests a modular industrial approach to construction. Thousands of years ago, this was a massive platform and temple complex, but today it is a graveyard of scattered blocks that continue to challenge our understanding of ancient South American engineering. The most striking feature of the site is the collection of H-blocks. These are large andesite stones, carved into a shape that resembles the letter H featuring uniform indentations and internal grooves. What is particularly notable is the consistency between these stones. Many of them appear to be near-perfect duplicates of one another, suggesting that the builders were working from a standardized template. The surfaces are exceptionally flat, and the interior corners are cut with a sharpness that makes the stone look as if it were machined, rather than chipped away with handheld tools. This modularity implies that the temple was designed to be assembled like a massive set of interlocking pieces held together by their own weight and precision-cut joints. For years, the extreme accuracy of these stones led to various theories about their origin, including the idea that the Tiwanaku culture might have used a form of ancient concrete, or poured geopolymer. However, recent mineralogical studies have clarified this point. Petrographic analysis of the stone shows that the andesite and sandstone are entirely natural, containing the same crystal structures and mineral compositions as the nearby quarries. This confirms that these were not poured in a liquid state, but were instead carved from solid rock. The builders were essentially performing a massive feat of subtractive sculpture, removing hard volcanic stone with incredible control to achieve the flush joints and right angles seen across the site. The logistics of building at this altitude present a significant physical puzzle. The red sandstone blocks, some of which weigh over 130 tons, were sourced from a quarry nearly 10 miles away. The heavier andesite stones came from a site across Lake Titicaca, requiring transport over water and then across rugged, treeless terrain. At 12,000 feet, the lack of oxygen makes heavy manual labor grueling, and the lack of large trees in the high-altitude environment means that the wooden rollers commonly used in other ancient cultures were not readily available. Researchers suggest that the Tiwanaku likely used a combination of llama hair ropes and stone-paved ramps, utilizing the sheer manpower of a highly organized society that had mastered the art of moving mass in a low-oxygen environment. One of the more subtle anomalies found at Pumapunku is the surface texture of specific blocks. Some of the andesite features a remarkably smooth, almost glassy finish that has been described as vitrified. This has led to questions about what kind of environmental or mechanical factors could have caused such a change in the stone's surface. While some theorize that a high-heat event might be responsible, many geologists point toward the use of extremely fine abrasives. By using sand with a high silica content and water, the masons could have polished the stone for months, eventually creating a surface so smooth that it reflects light like a mirror. This level of finish would have served to highlight the perfection of the joints, making the transitions between blocks almost invisible to the naked eye. The layout of the temple itself reflects a deep understanding of structural stability. The foundations were composed of massive sandstone slabs that provided a level base for the more intricate andesite structures above. Within these blocks, archaeologists have found T-shaped grooves that were once filled with bronze or copper clamps. These metal staples were poured in a molten state directly into the stone, cold welding the massive blocks together. This provided the structure with a level of seismic resistance, allowing it to withstand the frequent earthquakes common to the Andean region. While the site is now in a state of ruin, the remaining fragments tell a story of a civilization that viewed stone as a flexible, modular medium. The Tiwanaku didn't just stack rocks. They engineered a system of architecture that relied on mathematical repetition. Every groove and every socket was designed to receive a corresponding part, creating a unified whole that functioned with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. As we look across the scattered ruins of Pumapunku, we are seeing the remnants of a project that was likely intended to last for millennia. The stones were cut with a foresight that accounted for weight, pressure, and the shifting of the earth. Even in their fractured state, they remain as a testament to what can be achieved when a society dedicates its collective energy to the pursuit of structural perfection. This journey through the world's most significant monoliths has taken us from the fields of France to the high peaks of the Andes. We have seen stones that were moved across valleys, carved out of mountains, and split with the precision of a modern blade. Each site tells a different story of how human beings have used the most permanent material on Earth to mark their place in history, leaving behind puzzles that we are still working to solve. Now it's your turn. Let us know which of these sites were your favorite, and if there's any we missed that you want to see included next time. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, stay curious.